Just in general, always curious to see the process of writing, how you focus on setting time for it, how to find the small moments between big moments. Um, not anymore. No, I used to do that stuff a lot. So when I first started out was 2008. I had moved to Bulgaria because my partner at the time was from there. And the first month we were there, we went on a ski trip to Bonsko. And I didn't want to go skiing, so I sat in the hotel room while the family was off skiing, and I just worked on a short story. That was the first thing I'd ever written professionally. Sent it, the first place I sent it to, bought it, and I was off to the races. Because I'd been wanting to do that for a long time, and I'd always been writing stuff for myself. I'd done a lot of writer groups and everything else over like 10, 15 years of time since I was a teenager. And then that was it. And then I just started writing. And I quit counting in, I think it was 2018 was when I quit counting. I had 20 million words in print in basically in 10 years of being a writer. I had 20 million words in print. Now most of that, the vast majority of that was in the writing industry, and I did a lot of I got in when the .com sort of boom was happening in Europe with English language content. So all these people were wanting English language websites. So I did things like, hey, we want to build a website wiki about the X-Files TV show. And I went, I loved the X-Files show. I could do that. And so I went and rewatched the X-Files over 6 months and filled a wiki full of episodic reviews and for 6 months. I had another client that was like, hey, we want you to cover all the different Robin Hood myths and fill a website about all the different versions of Robin Hood. So I did that for 6 months. I had another one that said, hey, we want you to learn, we want a web, this is a French website. They were like, we want an English language website about Texas No Limit Hold'em and poker. And I went, okay. I went and learned how to play poker. I got a PokerStars account, a Poker.net account, and I started playing poker semi-professionally, just playing online tables, making about $750 a month after I spent like 30 days researching poker. And then I went and filled a website with a bunch of strategies on how to go make money playing online poker. Now, in the midst of all the cool projects like that was a lot of shit projects that were SEO based, like here's seven. This is when I met Chris. Actually, I was in Cancun and I was doing a travel guide for one client, but I had another client that said, we're making an SEO website for search engine hits on hotels, and we need 7,000 hotel descriptions, and all we care about is they want these 500 word descriptions of hotels, and I have to have these, these keywords have to be in there. So I just created a bunch of templates, and I just copy pasted and then filled in the gaps and changed the names of the hotels and changed the amenities of the hotels, and as long as they passed Copyscape, and that shit did not have my name on it, and I was just cranking it out because I was making like $75 an hour just doing these bullshit, articles for the internet. So there's a lot of stuff that has my name on it and a lot of stuff that doesn't have my name on it because I did a bunch of ghostwriting stuff as well. So I used to, because at one point in time I had a website called Complete Writing Solutions, was the name of my company. It's been defunct for years. And when I had that website, I used to do writing tips and all that other stuff, how to make a living. One of the first books I ever wrote was how to make at least, I think it was called How to Make at Least $50 an Hour as a Content Writer on the Internet. Something like that was one of the books I wrote in the very beginning. The very first book I ever wrote was called The Expat Guidebook, and it was how to be a digital nomad. It was like how to make money online and live and travel around the world while working on the internet. And it was called The Expat Guidebook. That was the first book I ever sold. Self-published, made 50 grand my first year selling that book. Had a website set up for it. That's when I started my first YouTube channel. And I was just a early 30s white dude living on the beach in Cancun, living the dream, being a travel writer, traveling around the world. I'd been in Bulgaria for a few years. I'd been in Colombia. And that was when I just really started getting into travel blogging. And that's when I became a travel blogger and started doing that for a living. And then that paid the bills for like a decade. And we got a lot of projects in the travel space, which led to big contracts with governments, and lots of fun times around the world traveling as a digital nomad. And then always along the side, I was doing sci-fi and fantasy stuff. But yeah, I haven't done any of that like how-to stuff in a long time. It's mostly just discipline. This year is the first year I've not actively done any game dev or any writing projects. I'm kind of like in retirement from those things. It's like I'm just playing video games, building my YouTube channel, my Twitch, turning this into the next empire. And then the objective here, which we've talked about in the channel member videos. If you're a member on YouTube, there's channel videos which are private. And we've talked a lot about like future plans there. And the short version is that my Patreon right now is dedicated to the next fantasy series that I'm putting together. And I'm slowly working at outlines, but it's literally the very last thing that I work on. And it's like I might work on it 2 or 3 times a month because I am not actively looking at working on anything right now. I'm just piddling away in between this, which is my day job. And then the objective here is hopefully by 2030, I will be at a position where I'm just going to write full-time after that until I'm dead. We own the place we're in now, cash, completely paid for in cash. We don't have any debt. Right now we're just saving up for the next property, which is going to be a mountain property. And the idea is that when I get the mountain property set up, I'll put a little writer's den somewhere in there. And then, yeah. Draken says I didn't know you were a writer. Yeah, I have been. I'm not actively doing it right now, but yep. Satari says, question came because I saw the book you recently published on your channel. Really struggled with my story for 10 years or so. Always enjoy asking questions about writing. A tavern-themed writer's den? Fuck yeah, that sounds like awesome. It's going to be something that's got like, because we're looking to put something up in the mountains, so I definitely want like an eastern-facing. I like the sunrise, and I get up really early, so I like to drink coffee. Wake, bake, work is the way I like to do it. Wake, bake, write. And for me, I like the early morning, so I want to get something that's like an east-facing room with a little fireplace set up in the mountains where I can throw some logs on the fire, sit down, and spend 3 or 4 hours every morning writing, and that'll be what I do in my retirement. Yeah, Vaxis, it's combat shouts, because it's the same thing for minstrels. Let me go into audio and triple check that. I believe it's combat sound volume, I believe is the one you're looking for, Vaxis, because wardens and minstrels also do that annoying shout thing nonstop. So let me get to a safe spot, Centauri, and I have some follow-up commentary on that. Oh, dude, it's so bad on the minstrels, Vaxis, because everything they do is shouts, the same as wardens.
Why are you bothering me?
All right. Really struggled with my story for 10 years or so. So, here's the #1 tip I can give you, and it's the same tip that like Stephen King's gonna give you. Just write every single day. It doesn't matter if it's good. It doesn't matter what it is. Just do it. And if you don't have an outline, you need an outline. If you don't have an outline, you're shouting into the void for no reason. Like, you gotta at least have story beats or some sort of an outline that says this is point A, this is point B, and you fill in the gaps between. There's lots of people you can look at who have done online essays about how to do that, whether it's Brandon Sanderson for world building or Kevin J. Anderson on like chapter outlines. The easiest way to do it structured is the way we just did it. The most recent project I did was done in a different way than I've done any of my previous projects. I got to stretch a little bit, guys. I've got a bum leg from the fall, and I'm having a nerve cramp right now. So the recent project that you're talking about, which is The Rising Storm, that book for the Weave and the Void, That was written with my brother, and that was done through Patreon. And so it was done with backers. So because it was with backers, I was doing it in a public manner because I had obligations. I told everybody it's going to be done by this amount of time. Here's how this works. So one of the backer levels was twice a month I publish a chapter for that book. So I had a regimen that said every day I have to put down at least 1,000 words every single day, so that I can hit that goal of having one chapter every week. And so the objective was 3,000 word chapters edited down, and then you get one edit pass, and then those become published on Patreon. And so since I did it in a public manner like that, I had to adhere to a schedule in order to fulfill my obligations to the patrons. The patrons. Xbox Switch Gamer just joined YouTube as a member. Thanks so much for the support over there. So that one, because it was done that way, I had a very public schedule. And so it was like, we're doing this every 2 weeks. We have to have a chapter out. So that was a motivation to always make sure that something was coming out. Now, when it's just me, it just depends on my schedule because when I was full-time writing, it's not difficult because you're doing it. It's your living. It's your livelihood. But if it's not your livelihood, how do you carve out the space? And that's a personal thing that everybody's got to figure out for themselves. It might be when you get home from work after the kids are in bed, like, I don't know. But everybody has to find that time. And the objective should be get 1,000 words a day somewhere, but get 1,000 words a day. If you can write 1,000 words a day, then you've got a 100,000 word novel in 3 months. In 3 months, you've got a 100,000 word novel. Is it going to be a good novel? Who gives a shit? You'll have it. It'll be a 100,000 word novel. And then you put it away, and you start a new one, and you do that one, and then you go do it again. And then what I like to do is you work on the first one, put it to the side, forget about it, go work on another project, come back to that one 3 months down the road for your first edit pass, because you've forgotten a lot of stuff, and you'll go back and reread it, and you'll have a fresh set of eyes. That'll help you refine that story down for the first revision. So that's one of the things that's always worked for me. Write something, put it away, move on to the next project, finish that project, or at least give yourself a few weeks of space, and then go back and edit that. Because the problem with your brain is your brain knows what you wrote. And so when you're rereading it immediately after having just written it, or with, the more times you go over it, your brain starts to miss the mistakes, because your brain knows what you wanted to say, it knows what you thought you wrote, but it's not seeing the little errors or the trouble words. So I like to call trouble words. Here's a trouble word for me. Well, it used to be a trouble word. Now I'm blanking on the trouble word, gosh darn it, because I haven't used it in forever. Trouble words are things where you use the word too many times. But Stephen King has really good advice on this. Just write. Just get it all down on paper, because the editing, you can come back later. And it's really easy with like Microsoft Word. Suddenly, that's what it was. Suddenly used to be a trouble word for me. So I would catch myself using the word suddenly like 40 times in a chapter. Suddenly. Right? So what I then learned how to do is just trained myself to stop using that word, but then also in my edit passes, the very first thing I look for is I immediately open up the Word document and I look for the word suddenly and I search for it, and then it lists them all for me, and I just go through and I start throwing them in the trash. I just start throwing them in the trash. And then, I get done and I weed like 95% of them out. And then it's good. And then I can go find other words to throw in there. And Stephen King talks about this too, about just whatever word, doesn't matter the adjectives, the adverbs, it doesn't fucking matter. Just get it down on paper, because when you come back, you can find cool adjectives to plug in and replace the generic ones that you wrote with in the first time. As you get better as a writer, your first drafts will become better, because you'll learn things. So where I'm at now as a writer is a much different place, because now it's like, when my brother and I were brainstorming the Weave in the Void project, Yeah, he said to me at one point, he was like, because we had a brainstorming session. I went away and I came back and I already had like this outline and everything else. He was like, how the hell did you do that? Like, we only talked for like 10 minutes about this thing and now all of a sudden you have this massive outline that's enough for 3 books. And I said, because I've been doing this for a long time and my brain knows how to formulate the story out from that one concept into the story beats. It's no different than if you're a screenwriter. Once you start doing something like that, or if you're an artist and you know how to you know how to draw and go from like sketch phase to finished polished pass, like you know how to make that process work. So it's not difficult for me to say this is how to put the story together. These are the story beats. This is the 3-act structure. Part 1, part 2, part 3. What are some of the things you need? You got to kill off a main character. You got to, there's some of the things that you could do to increase drama and all these other things. Fuck the short stories, man. Sorry, I just saw the comment up there. Biggest hang up has been finding small moments to fill in between big moments. I struggle a lot with attempting short stories for practice. I don't personally recommend short stories for practice because short stories are going to teach you how to write short stories. And if you want to be a short story writer, that's great. But if you want to be a long-form novel writer, you don't want to be writing short stories. You want to be writing scenes. And so you want to be figuring out your characters, get your outline. And so the outline, this is a great way to look at outlines. Metro says that's great advice. What's up, Metro? What's up, Dips? Will I upload this? God damn it, you're going to make me clip this out, aren't I? Hang on. Let me mark this down. Yes, I'll clip this out now that you said so. 109 Lotro writing advice. Alright, hang on. Let me get back to this. Hang on, I gotta scroll back up now. Scenes. So, if you have an idea for a story, like let's say the idea to your story is, oh, I got this great idea for a female character, like a young teenage female character who's a painter, and then she discovers one day that the things she paints can become real. All right, that's the idea. Okay, that's a cool idea, but that's boring in and of itself. We need an antagonist. We need something to create drama in that. Okay, well, what about a bad guy who wants to use that power of painting to create their own realities, wherein in the reality that they paint is just everybody's their slave and they've got world domination, blah, 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 blah. So they kidnap the young girl and put her in prison and they steal her paint juice. I don't know. I'm coming up with shit on the fly right now, right? So now we've come up with a bad guy and we have this. So now we have a story that says Painter Girl became a prisoner. So now her escape becomes an aspect of the story. Okay, well, is that the whole story? Is just her escaping? Well, no, we got to take out the bad guy. Well, is taking out the bad guy something you do in the first book? Or is this going to be something you want to make into a 3-book trilogy? Because if the paint lady is a big bad guy, then escaping the prison is just book 1. And then, so now you've got to make the whole book 1 is about the time that she spends in captivity. And then by the end of the book, and this is where you get into, okay, let's spend a couple of weeks, a few weeks, coming up with the story ideas and the story beats, and let's make that big, like, story concept and all of the story beats. And once you have all of that down, you can then take that concept and start breaking that down into chapters. Now, chapters are where I like to work on things in the terms of scenes. Perils Abound just became a member of our YouTube. Thanks so much for that. Appreciate the support. So you can then take a story beat and say, all right, we're going to break this down into 4 chapters or 4 scenes. And then you can make each chapter a scene. But here's where things get really fun, because then there's lots of different ways to write a book. Because what kind of book are you wanting to write? Are you going first person? Are you going third person limited? Are you going third person omniscient? So third person omniscient is like Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms. You can see inside the heads of all the characters. That's one writing style. Third person limited is more like, say, Robert Jordan or Brandon Sanderson when it's, or George R. R. Martin, you know, where it's one character, the chapter is that character's POV, and you're in that character's head, but only that character's head. The next chapter, you're in a different character's head. That's third person limited. And then there's first person, which is often like what Roger Zelazny did, first person stuff. Then you have to decide, because here's the thing, are you writing a short 100,000 word novel? Because if you're doing that, then you probably want to focus on short chapters. And this is where you listen to guys like Kevin J. Anderson or Dean Koontz or John Grisham, and they talk about how the modern reader doesn't want to read 6,000 word chapters. They want to read 2,500 to 3,000 word chapters. They want short 10-minute chapters because their life is very busy with cell phones and tablets and TV shows, and they want to be able to read things that they can quickly stick a bookmark in and pick up tomorrow. Whereas the guys from yesterday, from the 90s or whatever, or before, Robert Jordan, Terry Goodkin, Terry Brooks, why am I blanking on Memory Star and Thorn author, who I love and I watch on freaking Facebook all the time when he's live? Tad Williams. These guys write big epic fantasy novels where they have like 6,000, 8,000 word chapters. That is for readers who sit down and read a book for hours on end, right? So you have to kind of know what are you shooting for. And it's fun to play around with things. Now, I have a preferred style. I prefer to write third person limited with big 6,000 to 8,000 word chapters. That's my chosen element. That's where I do the most amount of fun. But I also like short, snappy, first person 3,000 word chapters because you could do a lot of fun with that. There's a big difference between a 3,000 word chapter and a 6,000 word chapter in terms of scenes. Because a 3,000 word chapter, you can probably do that in one scene. But in the other chapter, that could get really messy. So what you can often do is you can have 2 or 3 scenes that make up the overall chapter. So this is just where you kind of have to sit down and go, what do I want my book to be? What is, especially, and this is why I would urge everybody, there's nothing wrong with using someone else's book as a source of inspiration or as a benchmark of how to do what it is that you want to do. So if you love Dragonlance, then you look at the first Dragonlance novel and you break that down as how many chapters did it have. Okay? You want to here's a better example of this, guys. Here's what I literally did. And now that you know this, I'm totally spoiling this, and you're gonna go away from this, and you're gonna read it, and you're gonna go, holy shit. So when I was doing the Rising Storm, my brother and I said, well, we know that we want to have Dragonlance as like the primary source of inspiration, but our story is different than Dragonlance. That's just the theme that we wanted to do, right? But we have different characters, we have different storyline, and everything else. So I at the time was watching Star Wars Rebels, and I went and looked at that, and I said, okay, so in Star Wars Rebels, you have the old Jedi Knight who finds the kid who's living on the streets, and I was like, we have the twins who are living on the streets, and we have the mages who are going to find the 2 kids. We literally have the Star Wars Rebels concept here, even though it's with twins and this. So I said, let me go back. And so I went back and rewatched season 1 of Star Wars Rebels, and I literally took my notebook and I did story point. I did story beats as I'm watching the episodes. And I went, this is what happens in episode 1. This is what happens in episode 2. This is what happens in episode 3. And then I sat down and I looked at the story that my brother and I had come up with for The Weave and the Void, what we wanted to have in the first 2 or 3 novels. And I took the first portion of that and I plugged it in to these story beats, and I said, oh, so this is the first episode of Star Wars Rebels. These are the first 3 chapters of the book. Here's the second episode of Star Wars Rebels. Here's the next 2 chapters. Because I had broken it down into story beats and to scenes. Now, obviously, our book is completely different. The Rising Storm is completely different than Star Wars Rebels. But the story beats are the same. The kid gets captured by the rebels, or by the Imperials. The twins get captured by the bad guy paladins. They go to jail. Here come the good guys to rescue the kids from the jail. It's the same exact story structure as what's happening in Star Wars Rebels. Not exactly the same, but I mapped that out and said I'm going to because Star Wars Rebels had a very fast-paced, any kid can follow it, from a 9-year-old kid up to an 18-year-old person. Like, it's a fast-paced, boom, 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 action is happening. And then here we've got Chapter 6 reveal, end of Part 1. Now we move into Part 2, and now it's this structure. So look for, whether it's a book or a TV show, but what you're looking for is a structure that you can look at and say, I really liked how this worked. I want to make my book read like that. So then you take your story and you use that as an inspiration source. And again, remember, all I did was copy the story beats of Star Wars Rebels. I didn't copy the story, because we had our own original story, our own original characters, but we were very much dealing with mages who were in hiding because they were being persecuted by the paladins in the church, aka the Jedi being hunted by the Imperials and persecuted by the Imperials and being hunted by the Inquisitors. Like, do you understand what I mean here? Like, it's finding a structure that fits, that inspires you and says, I want to create that, but in my own story. And then you just break it down. And some of that, yes, some of that is just because I've been doing this long enough, it's easy for me to see the patterns in things when it comes to story beats. But it really is just a matter of going in and breaking things down and saying, okay, now we've got this, now we can work on the scenes. And the scenes are easy. One of the easiest things for me to do is just go forth and write. Like, I don't have a problem putting words on paper. Because I've been doing it long enough, and I very much just vomit everything out, and then I'll edit later. So my first draft is usually 25% bloated, and that gets cut out when I do the first revision, and I'll usually do 5 to 7 revisions depending on alpha readers, beta readers. And I've self-published 100% of everything I've done, and I've made a full-time living at it for years. So I never worked with an editor, and you can go read my shit and it'll have little mistakes in there and grammar mistakes and everything else, because I've never worked with a professional editor. I've always just done my own stuff with alpha readers and beta readers. Because there's a whole other side of publishing that we could discuss, and we've talked about in other videos as well, which is, that's a whole nother ball game. And I've always chosen, rather than spend 4 years trying to get a book published, I can take 4 years, build an audience, and sell my books to them, and I'll make more money than I would have made it on an advance and a first run of sales if it's only selling 1,000 copies, Lots of considerations to think about. But I probably randomly wandered off topic completely there. But the big thing is just structure. You got to have structure, and you got to just put words on paper every single day. Try to find 30 minutes, an hour, but you should be shooting for 1,000 words a day, because that gets you a novel in 3 months. And that's another consideration too, long term, is, are you going to try to self-publish, or are you going to try to find a publisher? Because if you're going to try to find a publisher, do not try to be Brandon Sanderson, because you are not that special. You are not the 1%. You are not. Sorry. You are not Brandon Sanderson. You are not Stephen King. You are not, what's her name, J.K. Rowling. You are not the golden goose. You are not the unicorn. You are just some random schmuck who's going to have to find an agent, and that's going to take forever, and then that agent has to try to sell your novel. No one wants to buy a first-time novel from someone that's more than 100,000 words. Do not attempt to write anything bigger than 100,000 words your first time. It's not worth it. Write like 4, 5, 6 novels that are 100,000 words or less. Get good at making those stories tight. Find alpha readers, beta readers. Do it through a Patreon, however you want to do it. Self-publish those bad boys once you've gone through alpha, beta readers and everything else. Join a book club, writing class, writing. What's the It still exists. Let me go check my email. This is the one I used to use years ago, and I gotta go look it up because I haven't used it in years. But I still get spam emails from them in my Yahoo Mail. I think it's called Critters Workshop, if I remember correctly. Let me double check here. Spam. Yeah, critterscritique.org. I believe is what it is. Double check that. Critters. It's the Critters Writers Workshop. Critters.org. Critters.org. This is the Writers Workshop that I joined like 30 years ago or something. It was a long time ago. And the way they do it is you have to critique other people's works. You earn credits. And then those credits allow you to then submit your work for critiquing by other people. So it's very much a give and take writer's workshop. And there's a lot of people who use it. Not all of it's good, but it's a great place to read other people's works and have your works read and get critiques from people who don't know you. Because the worst part about giving it to your friends and family is your friends and family are not going to tell you when it sucks. They're not. They're not going to want to hurt your feelings. And you need somebody to hurt your feelings. You need someone to tell you, that sucked. That was boring. Your word usage is shit. What, you're way too wordy here. Like, you need someone to give you tough love to help you get better at being a writer. So, writers' workshops are great, but they need to be full of people who are going to actually help you get better at the craft of being a writer. I was blessed / cursed to make a living at it for so many years that my guideline of how good is it is, am I getting paid? Because if you're not any good, you're not getting paid. Like, but you know, that's a different route of doing things. Most people are writing something while their spouse is paying the bills, or they're writing it on their spare time. So yeah, that's a rambling discussion on writing tips. Again, this year I'm not actively doing anything other than outlining a new fantasy series, which honestly will be the thing that I work on probably whenever I finish up being a gamer on YouTube and Twitch. That's the plan anyway. We're currently working our way towards the second property, and once that happens, which we're trying to make that happen by the time I'm 50, so I'm going to be 45 in January. That gives me 5 more years. And once that's taken care of, I'm literally going to just write for the rest of my life until I croak. Or 'tis the plan. At the moment, anyway. And I may eventually decide to go put something through the actual publishing loop, but I've never wanted to because it just takes too damn long for anything to happen, and you don't get paid for shit. And I actually like to get paid for my work, so it's always made more sense for me to self-publish because I could actually make money off of self-publishing because no one's out there taking 95% of the pie. If that makes sense. Wasteland says, I actually started a steampunk novel a few years back. I should finish one day. Got inspired by that book, The Anubis Gates. Never heard of it. Lassie says, love Dean Koontz. Pearls Abound says, The Count of Monte Cristo has over 100 chapters, but they're short, with a broad story that is quite lengthy. Yep. Centauri says, it's really tough to write stories that aren't the main story that's been on my mind for so long. It just gives me more ideas to place in that main story. See, that sounds like you're not using an outline. That's why you use an outline. Because if you do that shit, what you're talking about right there, you become George R.R. Martin, and you never fucking finish your novels. Because you don't structure it, and you never have an end in sight, and you just keep, oh, that's awesome, I can throw that in there, I can throw that in there, I can throw that in there, and I can throw that in there. Next thing you know, you're 10 years down the road, and you've never finished the novel. Because you didn't set an outline and a goal. Like, that's why you gotta have structure. Because that's literally what George R.R. Martin does. He just keeps throwing shit in there and never gets it finished. And he will probably never finish Game of Thrones. Ever. I think he'll be dead before the next book comes out. I don't think he'll ever finish it. Um, and that's because he created a situation where he has too many ideas in the story and he has no way to he doesn't know how to bring it all back in now. He's like, oh shit, I've got these 25, 50 tangles that are out there in the wind, and I don't know how to bring it all back together into one cohesive structure. So yeah, Centauri, you gotta have an outline. I would highly urge you to watch Brandon Sanderson's stuff on world building and outlining. Kevin J. Anderson has some really good stuff on outlining. Stephen King has a book called On Writing, I believe, that I would highly recommend. Because that's another thing too, is if you know what kind of chapter structure you're going to do, you say, I'm going to make 3,000 word chapters. That's my objective, a 3,000 word chapter. You can be under or over by a few hundred words, but your objective is to have 3,000 words per chapter. Well, then you can go, okay, I need a 30 chapter book. 30 chapters at 3,000 words a chapter is a 90,000 book. You're done. Anything 90,000 or less, you're golden. But then it's like, are you attempting to write a big Brandon Sanderson book? Good luck. But you're not going to get it published anywhere as a first-time author. For me, like Echoes of the Past was, I think, 225,000 words on the first draft, and then I narrowed it down to like 206,000 words after like 7 revisions. Story first, Wasteland. Your characters can be the idea, synthesis, but you have to have a story for the characters to interact with. Otherwise, they're just random characters. Like, there has to be the actual story structure, because then you could take the story and say, here's how my characters connect to the story. And these 3 characters come in at this part of the story. These 2 characters come in at this part of the story. This character dies at this part of the story. This is when the big baddie comes in. This is when the secondary big baddie comes in. Like, you need the story structure first before you have characters. That's not to say characters can't be the inspiration for a story. We talked about the painter chick. That was the perfect example of coming up with the character first and then the story around it, which is easy to do when there's one character. But what if you're trying to create the Rift Wars saga, right? So you've got how many characters are in that? I don't even remember. Pug, James, Jimmy the Hand. You got Pug, Jimmy the Hand, Tomas. I don't even remember how many characters are in that book now. It's been so long since I've read that. But as an example, like, you've got multiple characters pulling the story in different directions. So you have to have that story structure in place. Otherwise, the characters take over, and suddenly you've lost the plot and you don't have a story anymore. So Pearl says, writing quests for a game without a main plot has been my challenge. 3 months I've essentially written really short stories that had to weave together. Yeah, I wouldn't attempt to do anything without a main plot first, personally. But the world building for me always takes place first these days. Like, the world building is equally important to, and I think that at the moment, one of the best resources you can find on doing world building is going to be Brandon Sanderson. He is probably one of the most gifted fantasy and science fiction world builders out there. Well, here's the thing, Perils. Tolkien himself had the Legendarium far before he ever created the characters for the Fellowship of the Ring. So he had spent however many decades building up the Legendarium and saying, here's this massive world with this backstory and all this other stuff. Now I'm going to figure out, where do I place, okay, let's make a story set in this time period. And the interesting thing about the Fellowship is originally he wasn't going to do the Fellowship of the Ring. But his publishers were like, the Hobbits were so popular, the Hobbit novel was so popular, you have to put Hobbits into this story. And so then it became a revamped thing of, okay, now it's going to become this journey through there. But without the backstory of who Sauron was, Morgoth, the creation of the rings, like all of that was story that didn't necessarily need to have any characters. They could all have been nameless characters, but it was an important backstory and world building for the world to exist so that he could then create the characters of the Fellowship. There has to be a world first, at least from my perspective. I would never attempt to create something with characters without there being a story first. Like I said, you could start with the one idea. Um, for anybody who's super interested in this stuff, um, on this channel, on my YouTube channel, there is a playlist called Project Drummond, which was the beginning of the most recent game dev project my brother and I worked on, and we brainstormed everything in public for everybody over the course of like 300 videos. There's like 150 in this playlist, and then we branded and moved everything over to its own YouTube channel on the Weave in the Void YouTube channel later. But like we went through all this stuff because the beginning of it we said we know we want a Dragonlance type story that has many main characters. Why? Well, because we're also creating a tabletop game, and we need there to be lots of NPCs for the players of the tabletop game to interact with when they are playing their D&D experience. So we know we need these characters. So what do we need? Okay, well, we need a dwarf, we need a couple of elves, we need a half elf, and we looked at it and said we need comedic relief. And in Dragonlance, that was Tasselhoff. We didn't want to, riff on that, so we said, well, what if we create our own version? And we looked at different ideas and we brainstormed different things, and eventually we settled on brownies. We looked at the brownies from Willow and said, those are fun. What can we do with that concept? Well, let's make them a little bigger. Let's make them a little less stupid. And now we've got these magic using like cousins of wood elves who are mischievous in nature, and we can kind of have that Tasselhoff-like character without it being a Tasselhoff character. But now we've created this race who are mischievous and fun, and we have a main character in the party who's always getting into trouble, and that's the troublemaker NPC. And then we have the grizzled old dwarf, and then we gave him a unique backstory where he was an orphaned dwarven child raised by a high elf. And so she raised him away from the dwarven clans, so he's never been a part of the dwarves. He's been raised by a high elf. And then her cousin is a sea elf, and we came up with a really unique culture for the sea elves, and how there was a civil war between the elves, and the wood elves and the sea elves went off over here. They got to the edge of the sea, and the wood elves said, we're going to stay here. And the sea elves said, but there's an island over there. And they went over there, and then they sort of evolved into seafaring elves. And then we have the ice elves who nobody knows about. They're creepy and they do bad things, and they're coming back later in the next book. And then you have the high elves who are off living in hiding, because they don't want to interact with anybody because they think the world's going to hell in a handbasket. And then you have humans. And in our world, humans don't have magic. They use quantum technology. So they have access to magic-like powers, but they use quantum technology and quantum entanglement to use said magic. And then the church is super religious about that, and they think elves and all the fae are nasty. Like, remember my brother sat down, it was in the middle of the pandemic, and we said, what if we created a pandemic in a fantasy world? And we had these Dragonlance-like characters, and there's this pandemic thing going on, and everybody's living in quarantine, and the church is blaming the elves, and they want to exterminate the elves. And then we went and watched, there was a, I can't remember his name, it was on Netflix a few years back. It was the prequel to King Arthur. It's how Nimue got the sword. I can't remember, it was one season. It was a really cool show, and like the church, the Roman Catholic Church was running around like killing all the elves and fae. And I was like, we're taking that idea and we're putting it in the book, because that's an amazing pretense for why they think all the fae need to die, because their dirty magic made us all sick, and they're the reason for the pandemic. And now we can create walls and borders, and we can mirror the political shit that's going on right now in our world, but in a fantasy world. But then we wrap it in the shell of a Dragonlance story, and I like being creative. It's a lot of fun. Yes, the key is knowing when to stop. The key is knowing, okay, I've got enough, and now I just need to go forth and write. And that is possibly something that comes with time and experience. Because then it's just about the discipline of sitting down and going, okay, I got a 30 chapter outline that I got to get done. So every day, 1,000 words. Every day, 1,000 words. 30 chapters are done. That's book 1. Put that on the shelf. Now we work on book 2. You can write all 3 books if you want to. Write 4 books. Write 5 books. But split them into 100,000 word segments. Finish. Finish is the key. There is such thing as being too detail oriented. Sometimes you just gotta throw the words on paper and then just move on, because you've got an outline you gotta finish. You got stuff you gotta get done. That's it for me today, guys. That was a great discussion. That was not anticipated, so I appreciate you guys pulling that out of me. But I highly recommend writing groups for you guys too if you're just getting going, because that'll teach you structure. It'll teach you how to get critiques from other people without being upset. Another big thing is just going to be learning how to separate yourself from your baby, because way too many creatives get all sorts of upset when someone wants to edit their work. Oh no, it's perfect the way it is. No, it's not. I guarantee you it's not. It is never perfect the first time, and you need a set of outside eyes to come in and tell you that this part is boring, this part is slow, this character's dialogue sucks, this part makes no sense. Why is he doing this when 3 chapters ago he said this? Like, those are the things that you're not necessarily going to pick up on, because your brain is all about, this is awesome. Yeah, I'm such a great writer. No. That's why everyone needs a good team of, like, alpha readers, beta readers, people going through things. Now, there's nothing wrong with spending a lot of time on worlds, but also, you know, someone asked, there's some of you have been around long enough to have seen the various projects that I worked on, and one of the projects was the MMORPG that was being based on one of my book series, which ended up rebranding, and there's legal stuff that I can't talk about with that project. But someone had asked, like, when after the rebrand had happened, they were like, "Doesn't it upset you?" And I was like, "Why? That was one of like 500 worlds I've created in my lifetime. Like, as a writer who has 20 million words in print, like, I just create constantly. I never stop creating. Like, that's like if you ever talk to like an actor, like look at Morgan Freeman or any actor who's been doing it for 20, 30 years. They've done 40 or 50 movies and probably TV shows. Like, you're not married to one project. Like, you do many, many, many different things. Like, there's no reason to get upset if something doesn't go perfectly, or if something gets canceled, or if something gets edited down. Like, the first short story I ever published, they wanted to cut like 3,000 words out of it. Okay. You know why? Because that 3,000 word chunk that I cut out just became a separate short story. So I take that and I put it over here, and now I flesh that out to be a completely different thing. Oh, you want to cut these 2 chapters out of that? Okay. That goes over in the slush pile. Now I've got 2 different chapters that can become their own thing for another project. Like, just because they're not going to be a part of this project doesn't mean they're not going to work over here. It's the same thing with music composition. You might come up with riffs that work together in this song, and then there's 30 other riffs over here that you can pull from and put into other songs. Persilbound said never get more than 6 months to a project. Rarely make it past the 50 word mark. There's you know, I'd say some bigger projects I've worked like 4 or 5 years on, but most things are usually within the like 18-month range. Like some are less on like novel length projects. And there's been a ton of stuff where I've worked on someone else's stuff. Like I remember I got I have an anthology on Amazon, a sci-fi anthology, sci-fi fantasy anthology. And one of the short stories in there was written on spec for a guy who was trying to start a game company out of Dubai. He was running a shipping company for the military, and he had a shitload of money. And so he literally brought me on and paid me a boatload of money. He is like, here's my idea, turn it into something. So I wrote a short story. I wrote the Bible for his game. Like, here's the world and the lore and everything you need to know about the game. Here's that, which is what you can give to your world builders and your actual narration team. And then here's a short story, which gives you sort of this idea that you had in mind. Ooh, Benjamin Anderson. Hey, Renfail, The Weave and Void, The Rising Storm just arrived from Amazon. Tomorrow I'm going to start reading. I'm excited. It's a quick read, Benjamin. Hopefully you enjoy it. I can't remember what it came in at, like 70,000, 75,000 words. That was a quickie. That was fun. But that sci-fi project, like, that was cool because it was literally a one-off thing. It was like 3 months working for this dude. He paid me like 10 grand for 3 months worth of work. And it was in between these other projects I worked on. And it was like 10,000 bucks to write a short story and a story Bible for his video game. And then he never made the game. I still got paid and had fun doing it. You know, I probably worked on 30, 40 projects like that over the years. Never turned in anything, but I got paid, so who cares? My first video game project ever, I think I only made 20 bucks on, but there was a company called Black Sheep Studios, I think. The game was called Academagia, I think. It was like a point and click. I wrote quests on that game for like 6 months, and then I edited for 3 months. I got paid like 20 bucks, and I didn't care. It was my very first game project. I was making money writing game guides for killer guides at the time for EverQuest 2 and Lord of the Rings Online. So I was willing to do that one for nothing because it got me a game credit. So then I was a quest writer and a quest editor on an indie title, which then allowed me to segue into other video game projects. Nothing wrong with doing like internship stuff if it's going to get you the credits that you want to push your career in the directions that you want to go. Yes, Wasteland, riffs that could become other songs. Anyway, I'm out, guys. We've done like 9 hours of streaming today, and my voice needs a break, and I need to go hang out with my wife and my cats and check out all the mud because it's been raining nonstop for like 4 days. I'll be back tomorrow morning, bright and early, 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning for more New World Eternum. Multi-streaming, as always, on YouTube, Twitch, and now TikTok over the last couple of days. I've got more videos coming out this afternoon on YouTube, so don't forget to check that out. A new day tomorrow, everybody. Have a great one, and we'll be back for more Lord of the Rings Online next Monday, as is our wont. Hobbits for the win.